What's up? This is Dominique Beaumonte, and you are listening to Season with Salt, the podcast. Welcome to the Season with Salt podcast. You are listening to Dominique Beaumonte, and I am your host. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. I know it has been a while, and I feel like every time that I make an episode, I say the same thing. But I do need to improve on the consistency of the podcast, and I am committing out loud to doing better. Thank you for your patience. Shout out to all the people who often ask me, what's up with your podcast? When are you making a new episode? Thank you. It jogs my memory. It reminds me of the potential impact that a podcast has to share real ideas and real thoughts with people to either affirm or even sometimes change the way that they think and feel and act. So that's what this podcast is all about. I believe that Christians have the authority to talk about anything, and that God has given us the commission to season our words with grace and make Him bigger, to amplify the mission of Christ in every effort and every opportunity that we get. So that's what this podcast is about. Y'all, I got to talk about this DEI thing with Target. And first, let me start by saying that I do understand that there are other companies involved. And if you follow me on any social media platform, you are aware of the fact that I am pretty consistent in communicating how I feel about the current state of our world, particularly after the election of Donald Trump for a second term. So here we are. It is 2025. And what's been on my mind and on my heart is what is going on in the world, particularly around DEI, corporate responsibility, social justice. And I feel like as a Christian, it is my responsibility to talk about it. So I want to take some time to delve into these pressing issues, and I want to bring attention to the fact that these issues intertwine with our faith, as I mentioned, corporate responsibility and social justice all together. And I want to take some time to examine, and I'm just using Target as a guinea pig or as an example, but there are other companies. But we're going to talk particularly about Target because we don't have time to talk about all the companies. And as a person who actually frequented Target as a consumer, I think it's important to talk about the detriment of this DEI rollback on a person who supported this business, this company. So the ensuing boycott that we are participating in, more than 100,000 people rather have signed up to boycott Target behind the leadership of Pastor Jamal Bryant and other faith leaders who have said that we need to come together and prove not just the value of the Black dollar, but the value of Black life and Black genius and Black professionalism. I think that's what this is about. So I think it's important to not to assume that everybody knows everything that there is to know, and I will do my best to be thorough and to both speak from a place of passion, but also from a place of information. So let's just sort of think about where we are. Target, under the leadership of its CEO, Brian Cornell, had initially established itself as a proponent of DEI, and I think that that's important to note. However, in January, the company announced that they would be significantly rolling back on these programs. And as you know or may know, as you may not know, because you're here listening, this was on the heels of an executive order from the newly sworn-in President Donald Trump. And this executive order dismantled any and all federal diversity and inclusion programs, except the Black History Month program that he had at the White House, which is something else to be discussed probably on another episode. So anyway, Target's abrupt shift not only included the halting of any and all DEI programs and efforts. It also included the withdrawing from external diversity assessments, such as the Human Rights Campaign for Corporate Quality Index. It was inclusive of a lot of different things, right? And many of these practices and ideologies and programs came as a result of the murder of George Floyd, who the murder is in a great position these days, from what I'm hearing, to be pardoned. But we also need to talk about that on a different day. So, what sparked this episode was I watched Mr. Cornell discuss some implications of the tariffs and other things that are going on in the world in relation to some of the differences that we might see in Target's profit between the fourth quarter and the first quarter. So, in the first quarter of 2024, Target reported that they had made a revenue of 24.5 billion. So they were killing it essentially, but they have also experienced drops in income. They had a wonderful November, according to them. They had a wonderful November and December, and the CEO got on a variety of shows trying to bring comfort to shareholders and did everything but mention the economic blackout of February 20, the concerns that folks have based on the removal of DEI programs. He talked about the uncertainty of the economy. He talked about weather in certain parts of the country. He talked about, I mean, anything that he could think of, he talked about it. He did not mention the fatigue, the real struggle of seeing a company that you invest so much of your hard-earned money in, just saying or declaring that it has no interest in some of the practices. And I'm going to review some of those practices because I think it's important. So the figures are crazy about just as far as how well that they did during November and December. The figures that we are seeing now, particularly what we're hearing about Q Target, really reflect a challenging retail environment, which, according to Mr. Cornell, are influenced by factors such as shifting consumer spending habits. He's talking about external economic pressures. He's talking about weather. Mr. Cornell highlights that new tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada and China were expected to lead to price increases. So he's also talking about the potential that consumer interest in Target might also fall because of the increase in costs that Target will have to withstand as a result of these tariffs. So he's essentially laying the groundwork to completely disregard the impacts of an economic blackout by disregarding the fact that Black people have not just Black people, anybody who is participating in this boycott have any power or control. So here comes Jamal Bryant with this 40-day boycott. And this is in response to, of course, Target's DEI rollback. Pastor Jamal Bryant says for 40 days, we need to stop going to Target. And that's the beginning. And he has gotten 100,000 people to withhold from spending at this particular retailer. And for him, and there's some great articles and great interviews that he's doing, particularly speaking to his own church. This underscores the power of both collective action and the power of really coming together to advocate for corporate accountability and social justice toward companies that we pour our money into. So as Christians, now this is the lens for which I see our work as Christians, especially when we talk about the worlds and the communities that we live in as our domain. I believe that we are called to stand up for justice and advocate for people who are marginalized, period. And that even includes marginalized entrepreneurs, people whose genius and their integrity and their creativity has traditionally and consistently been dishonored. And programs such as DEI have helped to bring the genius of these individuals to light in spaces and places where no one else can take credit for their work, like we have seen before. So all of this that is happening really our faith compels us to hold these entities accountable. And the way that we do that is we ensure that our economic influence aligns with our moral and ethical values. And we should not be investing in things and people and places that do not honor humanity and all the beautiful things that God created. Everything just cannot be white. And let me just share with you some of the very things that the impact of this rollback on Target. And we're just talking about Target. Here are some detailed examples of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative that Target recently decided to roll back. They ended the Racial Equity Action and Change Initiative, also called REACH. This was a 3-year program that aimed at addressing racial inequity in the company, so they're no longer committing themselves to addressing racial equity. Number 2, they initially had committed to restructuring their supplier diversity program, and they structured this program naming it the supplier engagement. And this change really reflects the focus in or reflects a focus from rather diversity specific goals to broader supplier engagement strategies. So the name has changed and they have removed the word diversity. Another thing that has happened is a cessation of participation in external diversity assessments. So they have ceased to participate in external diversity-focused surveys, including the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index, which evaluates a company's ability to serve the LGBTQA plus workplace policies and practices. And they have also discontinued the diversity-focused programs within their company. And what they have done is they've transitioned to a new strategy that they're calling Belonging at Bullseye, which does not include any of the key programs that they initially said were important to their work. It's like if you get married to somebody and the first couple of months are fine, but as soon as the weather changes, no, I got a better example. It's easy to be cozy with somebody during the winter months when it's cold outside. But what Target has done is they're the spouse or partner who is committed when it's cold outside and they need the shelter and acceptance of those that can provide them warmth and heat. When the summer has come, they have fled the scene and are no longer accountable. And while that feels like a lot of things, it feels like abandonment. It feels like they never cared in the first place. If one stroke of a pen can drastically change the way that someone feels about your ability to be seen, heard, and honored for the work and genius that you bring to a workplace, it just takes one pen to change the course of how someone feels about your employment and your potential, we have a problem. And there are a lot of people who say, well, I don't see the issue. There were a lot of people who will try to re-engage us in different definitions for DEI. I've seen all the apologists. I've seen what they've had to say. But I think it's important for us to put ourselves both in the place of those who have been historically marginalized, if you cannot sympathize and empathize. And I want you to think about what it might have been like for someone who's a creative, a brilliant mind, to get a call from Target, one of the world's most prominent stores, to say that your product, your genius, the work of your hands will be featured in our stores. Consider what that's like. And then consider having all of that snatched away from you because you are no longer of value to this company because there's a new president. That's painful. And it's clear that there was no shareholder engagement. It's clear that Target did no stakeholder engagement because no soon after they pulled back from their diversity initiatives, shareholders were very upset because, according to the lawsuit, they were concerned that had they known about the implications of this rollback, they would have carefully considered other alternatives. But there are a lot of companies, a lot of entities who are positioning themselves to be gutted of some of the greatest workers and strategists and creatives and whatever else it is that they need because they have a president who said with his own mouth during a joint session with Congress that the day of being woke in this country is over. And it's important for you to know that being woke is not just you being an opportunist that speaks loud about injustices, but then goes back to your way of living. Being woke is ultimately about a consistent commitment to challenging injustice. And that, my friends, is what is under attack. Your intellect, your intelligence, your brilliance, your ability to decipher between good and evil under attack. And I think I said this on Facebook. It is shocking to me that there are some Christians, or some people who identify as Christians, who have decided that Donald Trump is the face of morality. Now, I will connect with you on the idea that there are some issues, particularly amongst Democrats and more liberal voters, that are of concern. And I won't go into some of those things, but you know what they are. But there's no way in the world that I'm going to be so disgruntled with some of those smaller, minute things that we can work through that I would elect somebody like Donald Trump to be the president of this country for a second term. And folks, it's gotten worse. It is not better. It is not better. And let me close by just saying this. I was talking to someone about politics a couple of weeks ago, and they were explaining to me some of their conservative values, and I was explaining to them some of my conservative values. It was a great conversation. While we're having this conversation, the person admits who they voted for, but they also begin to talk about the stress of that reality and how they're hard to be convicted. Because at the time when they were positioned with the opportunity to make a vote, they voted with their head and not their heart. They said that they failed to consider people other than themselves and the things that they believe in. And it hit home for them when members of their families were losing important and valuable resources. It hit home for them when people were losing their jobs because they were on probation, even though they had been there for more than 6 or 7 months. It hit hard for them to learn that federal employees got emails over the weekend, and they came into the office with an email saying, write 5 things that you did last week. And their supervisors were coming up to them saying, yeah, you do need to do this. Think about that. So this person was telling me how much that challenged them, because that has become our new reality. And I asked them, is this what you voted for? And I think it's important for us to realize that God is going to hold us accountable, not for who is president or who we voted for president for, but our ability to care for those that are vulnerable. And there is no way in the world that you can say that you are a Christian and that you love Jesus, but you have no care for children and widows and the poor. You can't say that. If you say that, you love Jesus, but you have no care or concern for those groups that I just mentioned and others, there is a problem. There is a problem. And it's not just our job to sit quietly and hope that things get better. I was talking to somebody the other week, and it really frustrated me. Because as I talked about the experience that I learned of woman who had been laid off from her job, from her federal job, the person just said, well, God provides. Come on now. That's a cop-out. And it challenged me because I had to elevate my faith in the area of prayer, because I didn't want God to just provide for these people who lost their jobs. I wanted them to experience justice. I wanted them to experience what it felt like for people and for systems, and for, at the end of the day, God to come to their rescue in a dramatic way. I wanted them to experience a dramatic finish, not only in heaven, but here on earth. That's what I wanted. And so I started praying for that. I started praying. God doesn't need our reminder, but I started saying to God, God, your word says that you hold the heart of the king in your hand. That's what I started saying to God. I started saying, God, you are the ultimate authority. Promotion doesn't come from the east or the west or the north or the south. It comes from you. You put a man up, you put a man down. Like, you are the ultimate and final authority on things concerning people. And I prayed for the people who are without. And I prayed that even if the politicians and even the churches and the people and whomever don't see the people who are struggling, I pray that God will let those people know that he sees them. And I think ultimately that's our role as Christians, to avoid ignoring who God is paying attention to. And he has told us to be called to the least. That's our job. That's our mandate from heaven. And if you call yourself a Christian, but you are not concerned about the things that God is concerned about, you just are not a Christian, period.
Season with salt. Season with salt.